So, good morning. I work at Bangor University, and for my sins, I'm an agroforestry researcher. And I work both in temperate and in tropical systems. And I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what silvopasture to begin with. So, silvopasture is not a new thing, but it's traditionally it's how we integrate trees into grazing systems. And we can do that in many forms, at its most basic level, thinking about hedgerows, up to increasing different levels of complexity. And what we've got here on the screen is pictures of the university farm at Henvice in North Wales. And in the top picture you can see various arrangements of trees, some of them maybe looking a little bit problematic from a farmer's point of view, where we've done lots of experiments looking at a range of different benefits that can be associated with trees, and also looking at the costs that trees might have in various forms of pasture systems. And in terms of agroforestry, given that pasture land is the most prevalent farming system in the UK, silvopasture is also the most prevalent form of agroforestry that we have. We started measuring that in about 2017, and we're still finessing that, so I would take those figures as indicative rather than absolute. Why are we interested in silvopasture more generally? Integrating trees onto farmland is being seen now as a really important strategy for dealing with climate change, which is obviously a key issue now for us. And if we look at various examples around the world now, Project Drawdown has highlighted silvopasture as in the top 10 strategies globally for addressing climate change. But as well as providing these sort of global benefits, silvopasture also provides a number of benefits on farm. And those can range from provision of shelter, which I'm going to talk about a little bit in a second, particularly important in Wales, where in a lot of our upland farming systems where the livestock are highly exposed both to wind and sun, but also, as we're going to go on to discuss in the rest of this session, in terms of provision of fodder. So a lot of potential benefits associated with silvopasture, both to the farmer and to society more generally in terms of delivery of various forms of public goods. Control of water being another obvious example. Whoops, have I gone too far? No. So I just wanted to quickly touch on shelter, because we've done a lot of work with looking at shelter systems. During the winter months, when we have high levels of wind and snow, if you want to maintain the productivity of your stock, you need to be thinking about the energy balance and the welfare of your animals. And we know by strategically placing tree material in pastures, we can reduce lamb mortality rates and increase the well-being of stock. It's pretty important if we look at a typical, the range of temperatures that our animals are exposed to. Once our animals are either too cold or conversely too hot, going into the red zone at the bottom left-hand side of the picture, then we're wasting energy trying to maintain those animals at their core temperature. By integrating trees strategically onto the farmland, we can control the temperature of the stock, and we've been using the electronic sheep here, setting up them in experiments at Bangor to monitor how the temperature changes as we move the stock closer and further away from various different forms of shelter design. So we've now gathered pretty good data on how the livestock benefit from having access to tree cover, and that also is increasingly important in hot conditions. Once we get above about 21 degrees, again our animals are struggling in the heat, and having access to shade infrastructure is important for maintaining their well-being. So we've done a lot of work just recently. This is very recent work looking at how animals behave when they have access to shelter infrastructure. And so what you're seeing in that picture is a pretty complex barcoding procedure where we've taken different breeds of stock at different ages and effectively monitored their behaviour when we give them access to a range of different, admittedly fake shelter designs. And when we look at we monitor their access. So this is just an arrangement of different shelter options for sheep, and this is actually a tracked behaviour of a single sheep. You can see by monitoring their behaviour we were tracking them every 2 hours, that they are using the shelter infrastructure. We are also in the adjacent field to this. We had a control with no shelter infrastructure, and so we're able to compare what happens, how the sheep are behaving, compare access between. We had Aberfields and Highlander sheep, and the Highlanders were more interested in using the shelter infrastructure, better using the shelter infrastructure than the Aberfields. So there was a difference between species, but in all cases, what we found was that there was better. We had far less shepherding problems with the sheep when they had access to good shelter. So we're building an evidence base now around the shelter benefits of animals. It does vary with context, but what I want to go on to do now is to set up tree fodder and to think about why we're having this session today. Tree fodder is a very old practice. If we look at a lot of the old trees that we'd see across the UK, we'll see evidence of pollarding, ancient pollards, where people have been chopping tops off trees primarily to allow livestock to have access to those fodder materials. I teach agroforestry at Bangor. We have a lot of international students, and when they come up to our farm, they're always absolutely amazed that we don't feed our stock sheep tree material. It's a very, very common practice in almost every other country that I'm working in. But now is the time that we're looking at it, and the primary reason, and obviously my colleagues are going to go into a little bit more detail about this, is looking at aspects of where trees can provide benefits to us in terms of animal nutritional benefits for livestock, in terms of their health and well-being, and potentially also for dealing with times of drought, when grass is struggling to grow. When we look at tree hay, it's an ancient practice, an old practice that it's been around for centuries. Traditionally, we used what was a cut and carry system, where we'd harvest tree material in the summer months and then allow that to dry, store it, and it's still usable up to 24 months later. Traditionally, we'd have used ash and elm, which is a slight problem now for obvious reasons. But I used to work as a tree surgeon, and if you dropped an ash limb into a field, the cows would be over almost instantaneously to eat it. So from a palatability point of view, we know it's something that they're very interested in. But it's also because of the ways that trees and their mycorrhizal associations, their roots behave. During dry months, trees have better access to water and can grow when the grass is burning off. And so there's a potential interest now in looking at tree fodder from a resilience perspective as well. A little bit temperamental, this. Okay, this is my one and only technical slide, but I just wanted to touch on this a little bit. We're interested in the amount of methane that livestock produce because it's a climate forcing gas. And one of the things that we've noticed, this is at a pretty small scale now, it's using sort of very much experimental farm-based work. We've done a little bit of work feeding livestock different forms of tree fodder, and one of the things that we are aware of is that with certain tree material, you're seeing reductions in the amount of methane that's being produced. What we believe is happening is that some of the tannins in the tree leaves are suppressing the microflora within the gut of the animal, and that's limiting their growth. I'm realizing I think I've skipped a slide. That slide. So sorry, I'm going to give that slightly out of order, but I don't think it matters too much. So I just wanted to, this is quite an important slide though, because one of the things I just wanted to mention is that, and again this is something that I've certainly encountered in other countries as well, is that the composition of micronutrients in trees will vary by species obviously, but also seasonally and in the context in which those trees are grown. So trees grown on different soils will have potentially different micronutrients associated with them. So we need to be sensitive to that when we're thinking about using trees and fodder. But understanding how the nutrient composition changes throughout the season can also be very important. Certainly, with working with fodder in Nepal, the farmers would elect to feed livestock nutritious fodder at the early part of the season. In the late part of the season, they'd feed the livestock leaf material that would keep them satiated. So again, using tree fodder for the well-being of the animal, but understanding how that varies throughout the season. And again, the way that whether we feed them green feed or stored feed will have an impact on how those benefits are realised. So I'm just going to introduce the basic mechanisms here. I'm sure Nigel will go into a little bit more detail here, but we know that if the tannins present in leaves are potentially important for increasing the flow of proteins into the intestine of the ruminants, so this gives us a productivity benefit. We know that the secondary cooked tannins, again, will have some antiparasitic properties, and there's certainly initial evidence now of health benefits associated with animals self-medicating themselves with certain species. And we know that access to tree fodder may help with the uptake of some trace elements. So my last slide was just really to think about where we are now. Agroforestry research in the UK, unfortunately, is a pretty small operation. A lot of the work, a lot of the interesting work is being done on farm. We know if you're thinking about putting trees on farms for any reason, it's a big decision. And we need to be able to match the benefits to the context in which we're working. So we now need to be able to come up with tools to help people to identify which species will grow best on their farm to suit their context and their needs, and that the design of those tree systems is likely to vary between systems. And that's almost certainly going to involve a little bit of trial and error within the farming community. Another big question, we're at a point now where I think mechanistically we're understanding how, increasingly understanding how animals will realise these benefits from tree fodder, but we do need to think a little bit more about how much of a change we need to see, how much land would we need to give over to tree fodder to be able to realise these benefits, and how does that vary between the different farming systems that we're working in. So that also needs to take into account the other sorts of benefits that I was talking about before. You know, can you combine fodder and shelter? Potentially not. So if we want to maintain our shelter infrastructure, do we need to add additional areas, and how should we design those to be most effective? So those are just some questions that I have. I'm sure you may have others. Finally, at the moment, there is a small number of us. We're spread across a large number of institutions. So I've just left this up here to sort of acknowledge some of my colleagues who are involved in this type of work. Thank you.